Welcome back, folks, to my WrestleRant video series where I give my in-depth analysis of all the pay-per-views that I watch on the WWE Network. Over the course of the month of November, I'm going to be talking about every Survivor Series pay-per-view that I watch on the network. Not every installment. I sadly do not have the time to watch every event, but I'm going to try to watch the best of Survivor Series, and I'm kicking it off with the 1990 edition here for you today. Next week, or actually tomorrow on Sunday, I'll be talking about the 1996 episode, an installment of Survivor Series, and the 97, and so on and so forth. But with the 1990 show, here's the issue, because I started watching, I watch all these pay-per-views so far in advance to review here for the channel. I watched the pay-per-view first on the network about a month or two ago. So it's a long time since I first watched this pay-per-view, Survivor Series 1990, before I stopped and I started watching WrestleManias 1 through 8. And then I started going back to Survivor Series to review here for the channel. So excuse number one, please excuse any knowledge or any lack of knowledge that I have of this pay-per-view. I'm just kind of refreshing my memory while reading down these results right now. It's been a while since I last watched it. And number two, since all the matches on the show are Survivor Series elimination, there really isn't much analysis I can add to a lot of these matches. But at the end of this video, I'll talk a little bit about the Survivor Series concept, why it's special to the pay-per-view, and why I really like the show on the whole. But to kick it off, though, we had the Team Warriors, and also talk about like the cool little names that each of these teams had, which we don't really see anymore. Now it's just Team Cena, Team Authority. Now each team has like a different special name, or at least they did back in when the concept was still in its birth. And maybe they did as of a few years ago. I can't really remember exactly, but at least on this show in 1990, 88, 89, Survivor Series teams had some meaning because they were given some cool creative names. And the concept with this show is that the last sole survivors of each team would advance to the main event. So all the baby faces that survived would be on one team, and all the heels that survived on their respective teams would advance to the main event. So that was kind of a cool little twist. I mean, it made it a little obvious on who was going to survive, but it was a cool little thing to add to the main event. I mean, it was like one of those things with like WrestleMania 30, but you don't know who's going to be in the main event, but you still tune in to find out anyway. So that's kind of what the deal was with this pay-per-view, so I just wanted to start that off before I give my thoughts on each of these matches. But the Warriors, the Ultimate Warrior, the Legion of Doom, and the Texas Tornado defeated Team Perfect, the Perfect Team, Mr. Perfect, Demolition, Axe Smash, and Crush. And that's about it, because they were only 4-on-4 Survivor Series teams at the time, not 5-on-5. So for an opening matchup, I thought this was really good. The only thing I didn't like about it was the fact that the Ultimate Warrior, who I'm a big fan of, I'm not just speaking of this out of bias, but he was the WWE Champion at the time. He had just defeated Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania only a few months prior to this to win that WWE title. And of course, his match, the Champions match, was the first one to open the show. I thought that was a little weird, seeing how Hulk Hogan's match was a little later on in the night. But the same thing happened with Randy Savage's title run. And I mean, I talked about this in my Survivor Series 88 review, how Hulk Hogan kind of overshadowed it. And that played a part in that whole feud, because that ended up playing into Hogan versus Randy Savage at WrestleMania 5, which I will review here on the channel come WrestleMania season. But that was not the case with the Ultimate Warrior and Hulk Hogan. I think Hulk Hogan took some time off, came back, and Ultimate Warrior was still champion. They never really reignited that feud. And they would team together later on in the night, and I'll get to that in a minute. But this was a fine matchup, and I'm a big fan of the Ultimate Warrior, so I enjoyed seeing him work here in the opening match. And I think he was the only sole survivor from his team. But the fact that his matchup kicked off the show kind of bothered me a little bit, seeing how he's the champion. And even in 1990, with the title being as prestigious as it was, that it should not have opened up the show. His matchup should have been a little later on. But even still, though, up next we had the $1 Million Team, the $1 Million Man Ted DiBiase, the debuting Undertaker, which I'll give my thoughts on a second. In Rhythm and Blues, the Honky Tonk Man and Greg Valentine defeating the team of the Dream Team, Dusty Rhodes, Coco Beware, and the Hart Foundation, Bret Hart and Jim Neidhart, respectively. So this was a fun little matchup, if only not for the in-ring action, but just kind of a clash of not the cultures, but the generations. Seeing how Ted DiBiase, he was kind of like the old generation. He was around the early WrestleManias. He never really got that world title that he deserved, which I thought was a shame, but he was still relevant around this period of time. Rhythm and Blues, the Honky Tonk Man, Greg Valentine. Honky Tonk's Man, IC title reign was, come and gone by this point. Now he'd been putting in a fun tag team with Greg Valentine, who I think they did some sort of backstage segment on this show. I think it might have been from a WrestleMania that I watched, but I think it was on the show where they did a musical number backstage. It might have been a WrestleMania, but I'm not sure. But even so, though, this was a fun matchup, like I said before, if only to see some of these stars end up becoming something of themselves. Dusty Rhodes, like DiBiase, was kind of the old wave of superstars, and guys like Bret Hart and The Undertaker were of the new wave. And a lot of people, I don't know what people kind of credit as the beginning of the new generation, but from 1990 to 97, when the Attitude Era started, was kind of the coming of this new generation, with The Undertaker debuting on this very show, Bret Hart taking part in this contest as well. Survivor Series would play a very big role in Bret Hart's career, of course, as we would see 7 years later at the 97 Survivor Series. But regardless, though, just to see The Undertaker debut here was really, really cool to see how the fans recepted to him, reacted to him, to see the debuting Undertaker come out. It was a cool gimmick. I mean, it was early for its time. I mean, it really didn't fit into something. I mean, it fit into the gimmick, kind of what the 90s were all about, and all these crazy, wacky gimmicks. So The Undertaker fit that to a T, but he would stick around in WWE for the next 25 years. I mean, it remains to be seen whether he's going to be wrestling at WrestleMania 31 this year or not, but just to think this guy's been around that long, to see him go back and watch him debut on the show is just absolutely surreal. But even so, though, to see The Undertaker debut, that was pretty cool. The show was newsworthy for that moment alone. And to see Bret Hart compete here as well, still as a tag team competitor, it wouldn't be for another few more years that he would break out as a guy in singles competition. But even still, the match itself was fun, I guess. There wasn't really any much to note here. DiBiase was the only one that survived from his team. But it was cool to see the debut of The Undertaker, and as well as some incorporation from Bret Hart as well, a future WWE champion. So up next, we had the Visionaries, the team of Rick Martel, the Warlord, and Power and Glory, taking on the team of the Vipers. No, not Randy Orton, but rather Jake Roberts, Jimmy Snuka, and the Rockers, Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty, respectively. So this matchup, like I said before, I can't really comment on the match quality because a lot of these matches were just really the same. But this was an absolute, complete squash. I think the only one actually everyone did survive from this team. Seeing how every match was 4-on-4, the entire team of the Visionaries won this matchup. There wasn't one superstar that eliminated everybody, but I think it might have been the first and only time, correct me if I'm wrong, that an entire team survived. I mean, we're not talking 5-on-5 here, so it's a little different. It's only 4 people. But it's still pretty impressive. For the entire Visionaries team to advance was pretty special, so that was cool in of itself. But even still, so I thought that was a pretty cool twist. Like I said, I can't really comment on the in-ring action, but like I said with the earlier matchup with with The Undertaker and Bret Hart and their appearance in that contest, it was cool to see Shawn Michaels, not in his prime. He would be in his prime for the next 10 years. But to kind of see him in the early stages of his career, kind of shaping out, cutting out a career for himself as a tag team competitor before breaking away from Marty Jannetty about 2 years later. But that still is pretty special to see him involved in this matchup. And aside from that, there really wasn't anything all that special about it, aside from the fact that the entire Visionaries team advanced to the main event. Up next, the Hulkamaniacs, the team of Hulk Hogan, Jim Duggan, Big Boss Man, and Tugboat, taking on the team of the Natural Disasters, Earthquake, Haku, Dino Bravo, and the Barbarian. So Hulk Hogan, of course, typical Hulk Hogan, was the only one to advance from his team. I'm not saying that in a bad way, but I mean, like I said, if we knew what we knew now back then, it would be so obvious that Hulk Hogan was coming out on top here and in the main event later on in the night. But that being said, though, like I said, not the best. I think of all the matches on the show, this was not the greatest. There weren't a lot of great workers in this matchup, just a lot of disgruntled or, some, kooky, clumsy, that's what I'm looking for, clumsy big men with Earthquake and Haku, and Dino Bravo was pretty cool, and the Barbarian, Jim Duggan was good, Big Boss Man. It's just, I talked about this in my SummerSlam 88 review, but it's just crazy to go back and see the Big Boss Man as this happy-go-lucky character, the county jail kind of guy, back in the late fucking 80s, and this guy was going to be around in WWE for the next 10 years in that new repackaged gimmick that he would get in the Attitude Era, which I think is crazy to even think about, R.I.P. But even still, though, Tugboat was also involved in this matchup, so Hulk Hogan advances from his team. Up next, we had the Alliance, the team of Nikolai Volkov, Tito Santana, and the Bushwhackers, Bushwhacker Luke and Bushwhacker Butch, respectively, defeating the team of the Mercenaries, Sergeant Slaughter, Boris Zhukov, I don't know how you pronounce that, and the Orient Express, Satu, and Pat Tatanka. So a pretty good matchup here. The only one to survive from his team was Tito Santana, the former, and I think not the first Intercontinental Champion, but he was, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, the first Triple Crown Champion. So Tito Santana, for him to advance here, made sense, seeing how He was a legend in the business. So Tito Santana advances here. I just can't really remember all that much about the matchup. But we get to the main event with the all-soul survivors from all the previous matchups. We had Hulk Hogan, the Ultimate Warrior, and Tito Santana taking on the team of Ted DiBiase, Rick Martel, the Warlord, and Power and Glory, the entire Visionaries team. So it was 5-on-3. We had the odds stacked against the babyfaces here in Hulk Hogan, the Ultimate Warrior, and Tito Santana. Three of the biggest babyfaces in the entire decade of the 1880s, or the 1980s, the 1980s and the 1990s, or early 1990s, I should say. So for them to all power up, I mean, it made sense for them to overcome the odds. It was in typical Hogan fashion. But I mean, it was good for what it was. The matchup lasted only 9 minutes. The earlier matches went about 10, 15, some almost even 20. So for this matchup to get only 10 felt a little rushed, especially since all the other ones were 4-on-4. This was 5-on-3, so you would think it would take a little bit longer to defeat all the heels. There was this kind of rapid action with them all being eliminated at once. But even still, that made for a cool moment at the end with Hulk Hogan, Ultimate Warrior, and Tito Santana teaming up and picking up the victory for their team. And like I said earlier on in the video, with the Ultimate Warrior kicking off the show, his matchup, kicking off the pay-per-view, despite the fact that he was the WWE champion at the time. It goes back to this, too. Hulk Hogan was the one to pick up the pinfall for his team in this contest. So it would have been nice if the Ultimate Warrior, if the WWE champion at the time picked up the victory for his team. But that aside, though, I can't really complain. It was fun for what it was. It was a cool concept. I don't know if they did it at 88 or 89 Survivor Series. I've yet to go back and watch those. I don't know if I will watch those because I won't review those for the channel, or at least this season around, maybe next year or at some point in the near future. But even still, though, it was a fun main event, a fun concept overall. So like I said, instead of giving an in-depth analysis of the in-ring action of the show, I thought I would talk about the concept itself of the Survivor Series and all these multi-man tag team matches. So it really, really worked around this period in time in the late 1980s and the early 1990s when there were so many tag teams that you can fill each of these teams with. I mean, they struggled to fill only one 5-on-5 matchup in 2014 in the main event of this year's Survivor Series with Team Cena versus Team Authority, and then you go back to 1990, I'm sorry, for this show, and every single match is an elimination tag team match. I know it's 4-on-4, but that's a lot of guys that you're putting in the one matchup, and in some of these matchups, there were some feuds going, too. A lot of them weren't just randomly put together, and each of them had a cool, unique name, too. So that added, I mean, it's a small thing, but sometimes it's the small things that make the biggest differences, and that was definitely an example of that here. When it made the teams feel special, they had meaning when they were given names, and they were given their own unique identity. And it wasn't just Group A versus Group B, and all these random wrestlers taking on all these other random wrestlers. So some of the matches had a story to them. The in-ring action wasn't stellar. Otherwise, I would have had a better memory of each of these matches. But overall, I really like the concept of Survivor Series. I'm glad to see it sticking around because, of course, there was at one point a couple of years ago that Vince McMahon almost completely cut the entire pay-per-view for one reason or another. I think it was because of a poor buy rate one year. But that should not be blamed on the Survivor Series concept, on the concept of the Survivor Series. It should be blamed on the bookers and the creative team, whoever's writing the show, that they don't make these matches mean anything anymore. Like, I'm glad this matchup, the 5-on-5 matchup this year, is going to be the main event. But that aside, though, in recent years, these 5-on-5 matches have not meant anything. They're confirmed at the last minute. They have no names, no coolness, like no uniqueness to them, nothing that's going to make them feel memorable a week later. So at least back then, that's what really captured the vibe of the Survivor Series dating back to 1990. And so that's what I really liked about the show, that every match was a Survivor Series matchup. In 2014, that wouldn't work for a variety of reasons. One, we don't have a big enough roster or depth of roster in order to do that. And two, of course, due to the fact that it would get boring after a while. I got a little bored in this show with every match being a Survivor Series elimination match, but not too bored to the point where it was like, okay, hurry this up. And I mean, it was a short pay-per-view, too. It was only about 2.5 hours, if that. I think it might have been only a little over 2 hours. And that was kind of the case with a lot of the early pay-per-views in the late 80s and the early 90s. Even still, that was a fun pay-per-view overall. If you like the old school stuff, then you'll very much enjoy this pay-per-view. I give it a thumbs up. I would definitely suggest you go back and watch it. If you're not all that enthralled about the early 90s and the late 80s, and you don't really like Survivor Series all that much, or Survivor's tag team matches, then I would suggest skipping this show, and you're all about the Attitude Era, then I would suggest checking out my reviews of the 1996, 97, and 98 editions of the Survivor Series. I'll be talking about the 01 edition as well. I'm actually in the process of watching it as we speak. Not as we speak right now, but actually during the course of today, I've watched the 2001 installment a little bit, and I'll be reviewing that at some point here on the channel. So that being said, folks, thanks for watching. I'm Graham G. Matthews, and I'll catch you guys in my next video.